He spent 40 years avoiding risks and playing it safe. And then, at the age of 64, he was fired. Today's guest is Paul Tasner, a TEDx speaker and entrepreneur who, at the age of 66, didn't retire, but he hit reset on his career and launched a company. Paul's story is fascinating to me as he spent decades pursuing multiple college degrees to then throw it all away to work for his uncle's small business. He describes this move as being a lifeline from his uncle to figure out his future. Paul eventually found his way to the corporate world with Clorox, where he spent over 15 years in a safe and secure career, ultimately being bored and unfulfilled. He realized that the safe path can sometimes take you further away from who you're meant to be. Paul describes that it's never too late to start a business, as his TED Talk, How I Became an Entrepreneur at 66, went viral with 3 million views. This conversation is about reinvention, timing, and what happens when experience finally meets intention. So without further ado, please enjoy Paul Tasner and his clocking out journey. Hey, Paul, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Raymond. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to first say I am just incredibly excited about our conversation here today. You and I connected a couple of months ago now, and when we started our conversation, I didn't know much about your background, to be honest with you. And when you told me about you having a TED Talk with over 2.5 million views, and the title of it is How I Became an Entrepreneur at 66, I knew right then that this conversation was going to be special for a number of reasons. And first of all, when I think about entrepreneurship, it's sort of there's a generalized kind of view of what an entrepreneur is, and it's generally someone who's in their early 20s, maybe 30s, who spent a few years in the corporate world or doing something, or and they want to go out and start a company. But you started a company that is a mission-driven organization at the age of 66. And what's special about this conversation is that if there's anyone who is at a late stage in their career, and we won't tell people, our listeners are going to have to hang on to know why at 66 we're going to get there. But if you're late in your career and you're faced with a change, or you're just feeling like it's time to get off the hamster wheel and you have an idea, it's never too late. And your story is the perfect example of why you can really launch whatever you're passionate about at any point in your career. And so I'm just delighted to have this conversation here today. And I think everything that you're going to share is going to be so relatable to our listeners.
Excellent. I should tell you, you talked about my TED Talk and the title. TED had a program back when I gave my TED Talk. TED had a program that ran for several years. It was called the TED Residence Program. They invited people from all walks of life, geographically diverse, but they seem to be more focused on the New York metropolitan area. That's where TED is located. They invited people to be what they called TED residents, which is a bit of a misnomer because they didn't provide residential accommodations for us. So we were on our own as far as that was concerned.
Yeah.
But all of us, we worked together. We did a lot of really fascinating things, including deliver a TED Talk on the TED stage. And then when it came time to post those TED Talks on the TED website or on YouTube, as they are, they asked us to provide a title for our TED Talk. And I think all of us, or at least the naive ones like myself, tried to come up with some very grand title for this talk that we'd worked so hard to deliver. And they rejected it immediately and came up with how I became an entrepreneur at 66. And I said, That is the unsexiest title I have ever heard in my life. And the comment I got back was, just you wait. And, you know, what was unsaid was, or maybe it was said, was, hey, we know what we're doing. We've been doing this for a long time. Trust us.
Right.
And they were right. I think I've got almost 3 million views now. It's been quite a few years, but 30 languages or something. I mean, they do know what they're doing, and I'm ever so grateful for the opportunity.
I appreciate that, Paul. It's so inspiring. I feel like the message that you put out there, it's a message that provides hope to people who maybe are at a point where, they're lost and they're trying to look for what is that next thing. And so we're going to get there. And so what I'd like to do is start with the origin story. Tell us, first of all, where are you from? Where did you grow up?
I'm a Jersey guy. I grew up in Newark, and then later in my childhood, we moved to the adjoining town of Hillside. And I went through the public schools in Newark and Hillside. Although my parents' families are from Brooklyn and Bronx primarily.
So what did your parents do for a living?
My parents, my mom was a retail clerk in a jewelry store in Newark, New Jersey, right across the street from City Hall and the police station. I say that only because the store was robbed during her tenure there, and we thought that it was a gutsy move by the thieves to rob a jewelry store across the street from the police station. But nevertheless, they pulled it off. My mother, I think
That's
my
great.
mother was a prime suspect for about 5 seconds, but then one quick interview, and the police knew that she wasn't the one.
That's great.
And my dad was a letter carrier for his entire life. When he got back from World War II, he joined the postal service and stayed there unhappily for his entire career.
Wow. So when you say unhappily, he sort of,
It's not easy work. And in his day, there were no carts or rollers or anything like that. In fact, I think he was the first mailman in New Jersey to get a rolly cart. Before that, they had to carry the mail, in a big leather bag on their back. And his particular route had some different elevations to it. So he did a lot of climbing, stair climbing, and it was an urban route, but it still was a hilly neighborhood. And little did he know that he was building cardiovascular health every day while he complained about his job. And I guess it was kind of a blessing in disguise, really, because although he passed away prematurely, it wasn't because of cardiovascular issues. So
when you were younger, did you dream about being an entrepreneur?
No.
What did you want to be?
Well, I admired entrepreneurs. I had an uncle, my dad's youngest brother. When he got back from the war, he joined another one of my uncles in an entrepreneurial venture, and they both were successful. The younger brother, wildly successful. And so I didn't dream of being an entrepreneur, but I had a great deal of admiration for men like him who became entrepreneurs, and they were kind of larger than life in our working class family. These men were quite special. I had an admiration for them. And then when I began working, I was fortunate enough to interface with entrepreneurs of all kinds of backgrounds, and I found them also inspirational. That's perhaps when I started to sort of daydream about being an entrepreneur myself. But I wasn't a big risk taker, and I stayed with traditional employment all the way up until, as you said, at 66, I became an entrepreneur. That's a long time to avoid taking risks.
Sure. I wonder, with your dad working for the post office for his whole career, that's a safe job. And I wonder if there was influence in the direction of the career that you ultimately decided to go into.
Not in a spoken way,
Mm-hmm.
not in a spoken way, but there was certainly no encouragement for me to be an entrepreneur. I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
was encouragement for me to get a higher education and and move in that direction, but there was academic encouragement.
So, what was the degree that you ultimately chose when you went off to college?
I studied industrial engineering because I'd gotten off to such a rocky academic start after high school. I was fearful that any other form of engineering would be too technical and too intense, and that I would fail miserably yet again. I really felt insecure about my capabilities. So I studied industrial engineering because, with all due respect to the wonderful industrial engineers out there, it was sort of known as the less intense version of an engineering degree. There was electrical and chemical and mechanical field of study. So I took the safe route yet again.
Mm.
Um, but that wasn't where my heart was. I never worked as an industrial engineer. When I graduated, I decided that I wanted to study mathematics. I didn't have a great background because, as an engineer, we only took a limited amount of mathematics courses, but it was good enough. It was good enough to get me into grad school, and that's where I went. I studied mathematics in grad school um, through my master's as well as a PhD. Um, and then I had another sharp course change somewhere along the way. 5 years in a PhD program, I decided that mathematics was fascinating and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the profession for me. I just didn't see myself in an academic life. And I had a real crisis. Here I've been pointing toward this for the last, 20 some odd years, and now what to do. And just at that time, that inspirational entrepreneur uncle of mine um, decided that because of his health and a number of other reasons, he needed me to come work for him. So here I am at a crossroads academically, and he throws me a kind of a life preserver and says, "Come work for the man that inspired you when you were a young boy." I was flattered, touched, and excited to have a life preserver. I joined him. It wasn't what I expected. He was
Mm.
a very difficult man. Somehow,
Wow.
whatever relationship we had didn't withstand employment, and he was a really challenging person to work for. I liked the work, but I was unhappy working for him. I just didn't see this as a career.
Interesting. So, Paul, you have such a fascinating academic career here because you started your degree in industrial engineering. You spent time, you got your degree, you went off to graduate school for years, pursued a mathematics degree, thinking these two degrees are going to drive your career, and it ultimately didn't. And you had to walk away from that. You walked away to join your uncle's manufacturing company, and it was almost like a fresh start for you.
If you ever meet real mathematicians, they're pretty solitary and pretty comfortable being solitary with their head buried in their work.
Hmm.
And they really thrive that way. They're really remarkable people. I didn't count myself among them. And I saw enough of them during my academic life to recognize that I wasn't made of the same cloth. I thrived more in a collaborative environment where there was interaction with colleagues, interaction with clients. I loved creating something too, building something tangible. Not a career in finance or something where I guess you can make a case for wealth being tangible, but when I say tangible, I mean nuts and bolts. That really appealed to me.
So, how long were you with your uncle's company, and what drove you to make a change?
he drove me to make a change. I just, I couldn't spend another day. I wasn't even there 2 years. It was less than that. I mean, it felt like a decade, but it was rather brief.
It doesn't sound like you were getting the collaboration you were seeking under his
No, to say the least.
under his leadership.
No, and I think the shock because he was by far my favorite family member. I just adored him. And he would advocate for me when I was a kid. If I was ever, involved in anything that my parents found challenging or objectionable, he would advocate for me and defend my position and all that. I really adored him, and so to see this other side of him, uh, it, it was really heartbreaking. But I wasn't really, I didn't have the luxury of nursing my broken heart. I had to really get on with my life.
Sure.
But I often wonder, and sometimes I think I've identified why we clashed so desperately. I wish I had been smart enough to recognize that from the onset. My dad was smart enough. He told me not to do it. I mean, how could I not take a lifeline given where I was in my life and my career choices? How could I not take a lifeline from my hero? But my dad, who he was a bit of a hero to my dad as well. It was his kid brother who had become incredibly successful in the business world. My dad somehow knew where I was headed or what I was headed into, and he said, "Don't do it." And I
Oh,
said,
that's so interesting. Your
"Yeah,
dad knew. I mean, he obviously grew up with them and, he saw the good in your uncle, but he also saw the challenges in terms of how he leads people and how he probably shows up in the world. And you saw the one side, but
right,
not the side that your dad saw.
right,
And he knew, but you had to go into it. Like you couldn't not take the job,
right."
despite even subconsciously that you were sort of, I wonder what this is going to be like spending all of my time with my uncle. And so interesting how that dynamic evolved. So, was your uncle supportive of you going to work for one of the largest customers?
Oh no, we had a huge falling out. I mean, I didn't speak with him for years after that.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Not
I know.
surprising.
I know now that he couldn't get out of his own way, just the way a lot of people, just can't get out of their own way. He was the product of his life, and I just happened to step into it at the wrong time, which I thought was the right time. But yeah,
That's interesting. So, you took 2 years of experience working for your uncle. You took the lifeline, and that 2 year period probably gave you clarity around this new identity of who I am going to be. And so you leveraged the 2 degrees. You spent some time working for your uncle in this manufacturing business, and then you ultimately landed with one of the largest consumer brands in the world. That had to have been like the holy grail at that point, right?
I was excited. I mean, I was excited. It was corporate America. The fact that there was consistency there. This wasn't my uncle's business. This was long decades of consistency, and so that had some appeal for me.
Hmm.
But as the years wore on, this consistency came across as boredom, or lack of excitement, lack of urgency. It was steady and slow, and whatever brought Clorox the success they've achieved, it wasn't behaving like my uncle. It was behaving the way large corporations behave. But it's my first exposure to it, and it took
Right.
years for me to become disenchanted. I mean, for many years I was quite happy and you know excited to be there and all the rest of that. And they
Yeah.
were excited. They were excited to get me,
Mm.
which I found flattering. not necessarily because of my academic credentials, but because large companies well, in every category of industry outsource a great deal of their work to smaller companies.
Hmm.
And Clorox was no different. Many of the brands that they produced were not manufactured by them in their manufacturing facilities. They made bleach and they made bleach derivatives. They were excellent at that. They made a lot of money selling bleach.
Paul, I think it's interesting how you described the start of Clorox and your time there. You said stable, inconsistent, and it just made me think about your dad's job at the post office and how
Yeah.
stable and consistent that was. And I bet, there's a parallel between, the start of his career and the start of this new career at Clorox where, there's a newness to it. And that newness over time, the excitement wore off, and that consistency that became boredom really started to wane. And how long were you there before you started to feel like I am getting another itch?
You really made an interesting comparison there. Yeah, in many ways, I became, or at least, I didn't think about it at the time, but as I reflect on it, I just became a very well-educated mailman. I had 15 years there, and I like to break them. No, no comparison meant by this at all, but I like to break them into trimesters, 5 and 5 and 5. The first 5 years I was full of vim and vigor, as they say. I was excited. I thought the sky's the limit. I can be the president of this company someday, which is so laughable to me now. That was so naive. But
Hmm.
it was my first exposure to
Sure.
corporate America. Second five was kind of, plateaued. I kind of steady as she goes. I no longer thought that presidency was within my grasp, but I still had, some aspirations, and I still got some enjoyment. I had great colleagues. I had some men and women that I really enjoyed working with. And then the last five, they were tough. And then really toward the very end, I got a new manager who disliked me intensely. Um, he he had I had respect and longevity, and he just didn't like that it took away from his stature. And I wasn't out for his job anymore or anything like that, but he was intent on getting rid of me. But I like to tell this story. Maybe this is if there's younger people listening. I had a dear friend within the company who served on different committees, and he served on one committee with this new boss of mine. And the fellow that was my boss didn't realize that this other fellow and I were very close. So he would talk about me in public. Um, and my friend said to me, Paul, this guy wants to get rid of you. He really wants to get rid of you. He said, but I got to tell you, if you can stomach it, hang in there because he'll make it worth your while to leave. And he was right. I hung in as long as I possibly could. Um, and by the time I did accept the severance package, it was a bonanza beyond my wildest expectations. So I walked away with a pile of dough and an idea, um, for the next part of my life.
Well, first of all, I love how you broke the experience and the time at Clorox into these trimesters, where it's
Yeah.
the 5 years, 5 years, 5 years. And I feel like by the time you got to those third 5 years, you had this new boss and you were already at a point where it's like disenchanted. You were feeling disconnected. And now you had this new boss who he was determined to get rid of you. And I love the determination you had to hang on there because ultimately you you left, you got a severance package, and it gave you time to sort of figure out what's next. So that's a pretty cool story.
Well, I owe that to my friend and colleague who was my eyes and ears in this endeavor, and I followed his advice, and it paid off handsomely.
Yeah. So, Paul, I'm curious about this clocking out moment. Take me to the point in your career where you're the director of operations, you're 64 years old, and your life was turned upside down. And I just wonder, tell me about that moment that occurred.
What happened is we were now in the early 2000s, or the first decade of the 2000s. You recall the financial crisis
Yeah.
was quite serious. And I think the company and probably others in the consumer packaged goods area feel that they're a little impermeable to financial crises because it's stuff you need. You can't do without bleach or laundry products or things like that, or food. Um, but but the financial crisis was pretty serious, and they weren't impervious to it, and they struggled a bit. I mean, I wasn't privy to the books, but I was privy to some of the outcomes. Um, and like many companies, they felt that the CEO was the captain of the ship and needed to be replaced. Um, and there were layoffs too. There were a number of layoffs. Not myself, but for a small company, there were quite a few layoffs, and it was a really challenging time. I adored the CEO that was let go. He was the one that hired me. He was a remarkable gentleman. He had my respect and admiration. It's just a wonderful leader and a wonderful guy. And they replaced him with someone every bit the opposite. In fact, he came from the Clorox company.
Oh, wow.
He couldn't have had a worse resume, or at
That's
least I
great.
thought. And I guess I didn't hide my dislike for him, or maybe I did to a certain extent, but I disliked him very much. And at some point, he probably was on to that and decided that I needed to go as well. And so I did. I was let go, along with two other people.
Hmm.
So now we're at the tail end of the financial crisis, pretty much. I should have seen it coming. I mean, I was an unhappy camper with this new leadership, and it wasn't the same job that I had been excited to jump into 3 years prior. So I should have seen it coming, but
Hmm.
we people who get fired often don't see it coming.
Hmm.
Um, and so it was a bit of a surprise, I have to say. I really didn't have a plan B, but I know I needed to keep working. The income was still important, but not so much that I needed to find another job. First of all, who's going to hire you when you're 64 years old? Um, I felt like he hired me when I was 60, which I found remarkable, and often told him as much. But now I'm 64, and am I going to strike gold twice? Am I going to find another
Right.
CEO who? And I thought, no, this is an opportunity to really do something different. And I started out because I did need to replace my income. I didn't have quite the severance package that I had from Clorox. I needed to replace my income. And so, I had a 40-year reputation in the industry. I was able to find consulting assignments, but they weren't fulfilling. To me, and with apologies to consultants all over the world, it's not entrepreneurism. I mean, there is certainly a degree of risk when you hang out a consultant shingle. But it's not quite the same as building a company.
Sure.
And I didn't want to do it,
Hmm.
but I needed the income. So I did do it. And all the while keeping my eye on what could be something special for me. And slowly but surely, over a period of 2 years in this world of consulting, I did land on something with the help of former colleagues, constantly discussing things with people in the industry. I did land on something that I thought had some real legs for the times that we were living in. And that's where my company, the logo behind me, that I'm blocking out most of which, that's where the idea was born. So I launched that business in August of 2011, and the idea was to create packaging for consumer products out of waste, much the way egg cartons are created out of waste. Egg cartons are created out of paper waste. They're molded. And I wanted to do the same, but I wanted to do it for a higher grade of product. I wanted to do it for premium products, products that are on shelves in stores, not, not necessarily just protective packaging for a dozen eggs.
Right.
Packaging for personal care products, packaging for electronics, packaging for pharmaceuticals, and that was the idea of Pulpworks.
So first of all, I have to just say, wow, kudos to you for giving yourself the space, that 2 years, to do the consulting, to identify like what is that next thing going to be.
So I have to say kudos to you
Yeah.
because I thought this would, I've done a lot of podcasts on this topic, clocking out, second acts. No one has ever given me the space to really speak in detail about all the formative things that led up to where I am today. And you, out of interest or politeness or a combination, you really let me get into the weeds. And I never really got into the weeds before about my early days like that. So it was a great experience for me to hear the spoken words about all that. So thank you.
Yeah, I oftentimes are told this was a therapy session. It was a culmination of you've just brought everything together for me, and people learned some things about themselves. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yes,
That
very
warms
much
my
so.
heart.
Yeah, kudos to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Paul. So I have a question to ask. You had said something in your TED Talk that I took a note of that I think is really interesting. You said by 2050, 84 million seniors with 4 decades of experience are going to be in the market. And in this 4 decades of experience ultimately means that of that 84 million seniors, there's going to be entrepreneurs like yourself amongst that group. And I just wonder if you have any advice for anyone who's in that group, that's late stage in their career, who's looking to reinvent themselves, but they just don't know where to begin.
I can't recommend where to begin except to say that they should do it. They should begin. I began again, as you might say, doing something that was very familiar to me. It was entrepreneurial. It was for myself, but the work was extremely familiar to me. It built on my 40 plus years of experience, in the employment of others. And that was very comforting. I didn't have to go back to square one as I might have if I decided I wanted to be a guitar builder. I mean, that wouldn't have played on any of my experience. So there would have been a lot of retooling necessary to become a successful guitar builder. So I built on a great foundation, which served me so well. But so I would say, where possible, try to build on your foundation. Um, Even if you say, "Oh, I'm tired. I've been an accountant all my life. I can't imagine building on my accountancy skills and bringing me fulfillment, in a new way." You'd be surprised. There's a real significant difference when you're doing it for yourself versus when you're doing it for an employer. There's a real sense of ownership, and even if you're doing the same darn thing, which in my case is pretty close, But doing it for yourself puts a whole different shade on it.
Yeah.
It's yours. It's all yours, and you can work with it as you see fit. And so even if it's the same field of endeavor, accounting or engineering, it's a whole different ballgame when it's all for you. And so I wouldn't tell people not to look in their own backyard first when they're looking to do something entrepreneurial. But whatever it is, do it. I can't, I've been doing it for 15 years and, we haven't achieved the kind of financial success that, you know, makes headlines or anything like that. But it's been incredibly fulfilling, especially in our case, doing something that's got a real sense of mission to it,
Mm.
replacing toxic, single use, disposable plastic packaging. It's really a good thing to do for the planet. I mean, that does bring you a lot of fulfillment knowing you're doing that.
Mm.
But more importantly, if you can still feel passionate about what you're doing, you have no idea how it feels every day, to get up and have this thing that's yours that you're passionate about. Um, it's I still I mean I'm not quite I confess I'm not as excited today as I was on day one. Of course, that would be naive, but I'm still excited every day. I can't wait to
Mm.
see what mail I've received. If any of my overtures to companies have been well received or whatever. I still feel that way every day.
I love it.
I didn't feel that way in the corporate world. I hated looking at my mail. It was just filled with requests for
Right.
meetings.
Paul, I love that. I love that advice. And I think that building on a great foundation is such great advice, playing on your experience. And you've certainly done that over your career, all the way back from industrial engineering, mathematics. You've built a fantastic career and you're building a great company on this foundation. I want to first say thank you for spending this time here today.
My pleasure. My
I
pleasure.
learned a lot, and I know that our listeners have learned a lot as well in terms of your story. And I would encourage anyone who is listening to watch your TED Talk, How I Became an Entrepreneur at 66. It's very fascinating. And we're going to share the information about your company in our show notes. So just thank you so much. I really
You're
am so
welcome. You're
grateful.
welcome.
Yeah.
One high note that I'd like to leave you with, and listeners as well. After my TED Talk, I received an outpouring of well wishes from the TED community. TED has an enormous platform. I think
Yeah.
they've got 28 million people on their platform. And my talk is on TED.com
Hmm.
under my name or that lengthy title that they gave it.
Hmm.
Um, I got an outpouring of comments, all positive. I mean, not a negative comment in the bunch, and all from different people all over
That's
the
great.
world. One comment was from a company, and a life insurance company in the Netherlands, a very large life insurance company. They're worldwide, and they said to me, "Do you realize what you're doing is probably the single best thing someone can do for longevity?" And I said, what do you mean? That you found a passion in your senior years that is going to bring you such mental health and such emotional health. It's going to add to your longevity like you
Wow.
can't believe. And I said, you mean walking the golf course isn't going to do the same thing? No way, not even close. Good for your cardiovascular health, but not for your mental and emotional health.
Uh-huh.
You've really given yourself a longer lease on life. And that made me feel great. I mean,
Mm.
um, and it was unintentional. It's just what I happened to do. But it and as I go through my life since that point, it does feel that way. I do feel passionate about my life. And you can't buy that kind of success.
Wow.
It's just, anyway. So
Kudos to you. That's inspiring. I feel like that message from that company is the fuel to keep going. And throughout your career, you've gotten this fuel from various people, your uncle, the friend, the CEO, the TED community. And as long as you lead with intention, I think the universe responds with just such positive energy that just keeps fueling you. And I do believe that is the longevity of life.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you,
Paul, thank you so much. This has been great. I feel like we can keep going here. But thank you so much.
My pleasure. Absolutely. It was a pleasure. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time.
Hello, everyone. It's Raymond again here. I want to take a moment to say a special thanks to our sponsor, Career Minds. They're a global provider of career transition and career development solutions. And if you'd like to hear more on Clocking Out, we'd love for you to take a second and click follow of your favorite podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a rating or review. It really helps new listeners find the show. You can also watch the full episode on YouTube. Just search Clocking Out with Raymond Lee and hit subscribe. And if you're listening on Spotify, don't forget to check out our episode polls or just drop us a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Finally, if you or someone you know has a story to share about navigating change, taking a risk, or rethinking your career, we want to hear from you. Head to the link in our show notes and fill out the form to be considered for a future episode. Until next time, remember, if you're just sitting there thinking that you're stuck or you're unsure of your career or future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage yourself to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that genuinely matter to me most? Am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.